The Behemoth Brewing Company presents the Department of Conversation with Pat Brittenden. Behemoth, give me something hoppy.
It is a very warm welcome to the Department of Conversation. My former colleague, I can say that now. What I try and do, Peter, is I try and get clout off people who are more famous than me by saying, so I knew that I used to work with this person. Peter Wolfkamp, resident builder, you're the foreman at the block, all-round broadcaster and building expert. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Hey, look, real pleasure to be with you, Pat, and lovely to see your face. And we do go back quite a few years, I think.
Yeah, I was working at ZB. Well, for full time, it was like, it was for 7 years and it finished in 2011. So for full time, it was, I guess that means 05 to 11, something like that, or maybe 04 to 10 and new job in 11. So, but part time, it was probably a couple of years before that. So I think I started at ZB maybe 2000. I was floating around from probably early 2000s. Shit, that's nearly 20 years.
I mean, look, ZB's been around obviously for some people for all of their lives. I was lucky enough to sort of be around, the edges of it, actually not long after they started in about 87, 88, something like that. So never cracked the big job there, but it's been a real privilege, I guess, for me to have been part of that organisation for as long as I have been.
Would you want the big job? I mean, you're someone who is. I mean, let me just spell it out from people. You're someone who I guess was a builder, and then used your expertise to come into a form of broadcasting. I guess as someone who can give advice and give tips and tricks, and then from there you went further on in broadcasting to now be the. Shall we bring it up? Shall we? Well, we could do your like official kind of CV, and then you get to be the resident builder at ZB is on a permanent basis. And then from there, you've got numerous opportunities in television, kind of, I guess, culminating most recently as the foreman of the block. So your broadcasting career kind of, as you say, around the edges never got, but it's certainly gone up. Would you like the big job? Would you like something in broadcasting more? Would you like more than what you're doing right now?
Look, it's not something I've ever actually genuinely pursued. I think I've always been reasonably modest in terms of assessing my abilities. And so I think that we have a number of really great broadcasters, which is awesome. And now that I'm doing the Sunday morning show, which is a regular Sunday morning show, in fact, I've just come in from a little job. And just as I was wrapping up, putting the gear in the back of the truck, a couple walked by, said, "Oh, hey, love the show on Sunday. We listen every Sunday. We've just retired. We've got the time. We're about to build a house. Can I just ask you a quick question?" and so I think one of the beautiful things about radio, and I guess in that debate around the arrival of the internet and Facebook and all of those other media channels, what's the enduring appeal of talkback radio? And I think, without being too trite about it, it does actually build a genuine community. That people who connect with the host and connect with the themes feel that they're part of something. And this couple who walked by today said hello, felt that they could say hello and have a bit of a chat and enjoy listening. And so they're part of that community. And I that part of radio, I think, is really special, and I don't think it'll ever go away. Or talkback radio in particular.
But the reason that they would have known who you were, though, would not been because of the radio. It would have been because of the TV. So they've made a connection, haven't they? They've seen you on the block, likely, and they know from on the block that you work on ZB. So they now know what you look like. I'm interested to your thoughts around being recognizable, because even in my day, which was only a decade ago, they had a webcam in the studio.
Right.
I remember at ZB, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more. There were particular hosts at ZB who refused to have the webcam on whilst they were doing their show, because they were like, I didn't sign up to be on camera. This is not an on-camera thing. Whereas today in radio, if you watch it, it's basically a television studio with audio. All the shows have full sets and that kind of stuff. But how do you feel about I guess you've lost your anonymity through doing television, which makes sense. But radio used to be that community with the person whose voice you heard.
Yeah.
Who could look however you liked in your mind. It could be Brad Pitt or it could be Danny DeVito. You know, if it was a male voice, they could look like anything. So you made up. But now a little bit of that, and I'll use the term magic because it's the magic of the listener having a picture in their head themselves has gone. How do you feel about that in radio? But also for you, obviously losing anonymity doing TV as well.
Yeah, I'm pleased you told me about the webcam because I don't know I don't think it works all the time, and I certainly don't have it on the studio when I'm there at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning. It's probably not me at my finest. But look, I had a caller a couple of months ago, maybe even a year or so ago, and she was talking about a topic, building topic, and then she went on to make a comment about the blog. And that she couldn't stand the program and would never watch it, but obviously did at some stage, and thought that it was just terrible. And she's telling me this, and I'm thinking, you haven't made that connection between the
really,
which I am, and me. So I think, in some ways, for where I'm at, potentially there is an audience that we have or that I have on the radio that's not part of a television audience, and then there's certainly a television audience that wouldn't ever tune into a talkback station. So in that sense, I think there is two groups that I'm part of. And in terms of the anonymity,
or even three,
yeah,
possibly. The radio audience, the television audience, and the crossover audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose I feel like I've been in broadcasting for a while, so it's not uncommon that someone might recognise the name or even recognise the voice, let's say. But in terms of the television thing, that's been really fascinating. And I think what is fascinating is because the block is now, we're into our 10th year, right? So It's been on television for a significant amount of time. And when it is on, it's on a reasonable amount, 3 or 4 nights a week. And I think over that time, people do, as an audience, develop a relationship or rapport or a sense of connectedness with the person that they're seeing. Mm-hmm. And I was in the supermarket and just cruising down looking for, a can of chopped tomatoes or something like that. And a woman who was also looking for something turned to me and went, "Oh, hi." And then turned back again. And then I could see her sort of become a bit embarrassed. And she said, "I'm really sorry, but I thought that I knew you." And the sense was, because I've watched the program potentially over a few years' time, I have a sense that I know you. Now, obviously I don't because we've never met. And I'm really embarrassed for saying hello like that and in such a familiar tone. And I actually thought that was quite charming, quite lovely, that people do come to relate to you and feel that they can engage with you in that way. And look, overwhelmingly, people are unbelievably polite and respectful and all the rest of it. So, we'll go to a cafe and someone will sit down and go, "Oh, hi," and that sort of thing. But it's never uncomfortable or unwarranted. And look, to be honest, I'm quite happy to have a chat most of the time. So if I've got the time, and someone wants to ask me a couple of building questions or something like that, I'm more than happy to chat.
And the invoice comes through within 7 days. Dude, I've got a guy that comes and mows my lawns. I love him to bits, and he's the most impressive invoicer I've ever seen. Literally, as they're backing out the driveway, ding, I have an invoice in my inbox. Like, honestly, and I don't know whether he's like, I'm dyslexic, right? And sometimes admin doesn't work so well with me. I don't know whether he's one of those guys that goes, if I don't do it now, I'll forget about it and it'll be 5 days. But as he's backing out the driveway, I get an invoice for the job he's just done. It's a pretty clever. I'm quite impressed. I like it. I think it's good. So,
look, I've, I suppose on a related topic, I've been self-employed, I think since 1987.
Wow.
And I guess over those times, there's been good times and bad times being in business. And in talking to young guys predominantly who are in the building trade and that sort of thing, and young girls now as well, one of the things I'll say is make sure you get your business side of your enterprise sorted out. That I've seen it so many times where young people who are good at what they do in their trades then end up becoming business people. That's not their first love. It's not their passion. And and we see it time and time again. It's a well-trodden path of sort of, going out on your own, then finding it's overwhelming and potentially the business collapsing. And so I think for a guy like that who's figured out that this is what works for me, I do the job, maybe he's got it 0 or something similar like that,
Yep.
then and he bangs that invoice out, great, because he's going to get paid and he's going to thrive. But sitting there at the end of the month thinking, gee, now what job did I do that Monday 3 weeks ago? That's we got to get better, and I think we should be encouraging more business studies, and certainly people like IRD and IMBI and that sort of thing, if they captured these young people going out and starting on their journey to self-employment and set up some really good business mentors or practice for them, that would make a massive difference.
You're talking about being self-employed since the late 1940s. I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
What percentage of your life today would be kind of paid building versus, I would assume that someone like yourself, if you see a little project on the side, you might get into it, like a reno or something like that, versus broadcasting. Like I could be wrong about the reno, you can correct me, but if there's those sort of 3 parts of your life, which would be someone paying you for a job, you doing your own work,
Sure.
building and broadcasting, what would the split be for? Obviously, I don't want to know your income, but for your paid work sort of thing.
Yeah, look, it's a fair question. I think certainly, the opportunity to do more broadcasting and, let's say, broadly speaking, work related to broadcasting would probably be 80% of my time and my income now, realistically. And that's a combination, I guess, of radio and then the television. I'm lucky enough to have the support of a couple of brands, and I support them. So, people like Resine Construction Systems and Metro Performance Glass, J&L and Bailey's and that sort of thing. So we work collaboratively to support what they do. And then, there's a small amount of building that goes on, but in many ways now, with, I guess, the number of things that I'm involved with, I'd probably be the worst builder to have on site, because there'd always be, I've got to go here, I've got to go there. So I think, if I was back on the tools, which I've done recently for some of my own projects, I want to commit blocks of time to it, pardon the pun, and just solely focus on that.
So is there ever a concern for you? Because you're is the correct title the foreman for the block? Is that your gig? Which means, I assume that means you would ultimately be responsible for things, making sure things are done correctly, to code, all that kind of thing as well. If you're, let's say, spending 10 to 20% of your the building world, hands-on tools, so to speak, that the upskilling, I'm trying to think of a professional way. I'm not the professional broadcaster here, you are. I'm trying to think of a way for the upskilling, because I would imagine codes change, when you're in the trade, you would then be able to put it into practice, a new way of doing things. The lintel's got a new way of being, I don't know, whatever it is.
Sure.
If you're not doing it on a day-to-day basis, is there a concern that you might fall behind and maybe, make mistakes in that area?
Yeah. Look, I think that's a real, it's a genuine question, and it's something that I always address to myself as well. So in the last couple of years, we've managed to, we bought a little property to do up, right? And partly as a project for me, partly as an opportunity to get back on the tools, which, in many ways is my first love. Like there is a part of me that is genuinely in my happy place, either when I'm in the workshop making something, or, the image that often comes to me is doing door hardware, right? Which is just that task where you just need to be solely focused on what you're doing. And it involves a little, especially traditional sort of door hardware, it's chisels and mortises and, sharpening your tools and that sort of thing. And I'm absolutely in my happy place when I'm doing that. And at the same time, like I've just ordered timber and joinery and cladding and that sort of thing. I'm going to be building a little 10 square metre sleep out. Now, not many times nowadays do you actually frame up. Typically all of our stuff is pre-cut, pre-nail, or off-site manufacture. So I'm going to be setting up the drop saw again. I got a nail gun out. I've got to mark out my studs, do all my nogs, work out the rake of a 7-degree, running rake, and all of these sorts of things. Cut my rafters, do my bird's mouth, and I am fizzing at the thought of just going out. Set of headphones on with music in it, I'm absolutely in a happy place. So yes, I am very much aware for myself that I want to be. I don't ever want to become the person that talks about stuff but doesn't do it.
So it sounds like, it almost sounds like, to put words into your mouth, that what was your profession and your first love, that'll be ZB. They need you to come in for the big job.
No, it'll probably be one of those bloody private caller things that we seem to be plagued with these days.
On the block, I forgot what I was going to say. I forgot where I was going to go with that. Anyway, we were talking about upskilling, and we were talking about what you're doing. I was going to ask you specifically more about the block. You seem to be the person, obviously the expert when it comes to building, but also the person who brings reality to what's going on. And I got a little clip here from series 9, episode 8, when you're talking about wallpaper. We might just play this to give people a bit of an idea as to what we're talking about when you're Mr. Reality.
Typically discovered on a Friday, emits a pungent scent that attracts wolves, or rather, the wolf.
It's not the easiest wallpaper in the world to give a guy, given that it's 1:30 on Friday, it's tools down at 6 o'clock.
He's got still another room to go.
Are you going to try and deliver 2 rooms?
Yeah.
Yep. Meg called it. Definitely.
Yeah, there you go. So obviously you were, without saying it, you were maybe bringing attention to the fact that the work that they had planned might be unrealistic, perhaps. So is that part of your rule to kind of go, hey guys, you know, what you're, because of my 1800 years of experience, what you're trying to attempt as amateurs, you might be pushing a bit far. You're the reality voice, the voice of sanity sometimes on the site.
Yeah. Look, I think that, I guess on building sites, there's always that tension between fast, cheap, or good, right? So you imagine sort of, ideally you want all 3 of those, but in reality you won't. You'll get 2 of those 3, but you'll never get all 3 of them. And there's all sorts of little GIFs and posters and images around exactly that dilemma. So I guess this, and that's where the block, while it is obviously for television and so on, is not unlike any other building project. It's not completely distinct from a building project. And so, teams going, we want to do this. And I'm going, okay, well, if your scale is really big, can you also ensure that the quality is going to be to a suitable standard? And people face that with their renovation dilemmas or the size of a house that you might want to build. If I've got a fixed budget and I want to build 250 square meters of house because I need that space, do I need to then adjust the quality of the build to fit the budget? Or do I make a choice and go, hey, I tell you what, if my budget is this, I can do a really good house, but it'll only be 200 square meters.
Yeah. Really,
so, there's always that tension, that dynamic, which is part of real life, part of building, is obviously part of the block as well.
I'm the kind of person that would certainly go for the latter. Like let's say I wanted a 4-bedroom house, and let's say that was around 200 square meters. I'd be like, I'd rather err on the side of 160 square meters and have double glazing and have, thicker walls or whatever it is, than push to 200, 220 and have, a lesser quality house. That would certainly be my perspective. I'm about over engineering though as well. I like the idea of, I was watching a program. Oh, I know what it was. I watched that revolting program, $1 Million Properties, Los Angeles. But they were showing this house that was built in 1928, and the walls were like, I can't even get it in the screen. They would have been like this.
Yeah.
And I just went, oh my goodness, because here in Dunedin, of course, we think about things like, solar gain and heat radiation and that kind of stuff. And a solid wall like this would just be phenomenal for keeping the heat in the house. So yeah, I like the idea of over engineering. But what I hear you describing about, I wrote it down, fast, cheap, good. I used to build and sell computers back in the day, and we had a graph like your X and Y axis like this, and it would start down in the bottom left hand corner and cruise along on a bit of an upslope, and then it would take off, be really steep, like a hockey stick graph. And what it was performance and price. So in other words, there's quite a long time, and when the graph doesn't go too high, where the price is going up and up and up, but your performance isn't going up that much. And then you get to the hockey stick where the price shoots through the roof, but the performance shoots through the roof as well. And what you want to try and do is get it in that little curve there, the sweet spot,
Right.
which is where you get the best performance for the best price. So as it just clicks up into that hockey stick, that's where we were suggesting to, if they had a budgetary concern, suggesting to customers they'd get their best bang for the buck, because it's where you'd find the best price for the best performance. Yeah, you can pay a lot more and you'll get a bit more performance, or you can pay a lot less and you get a bit less performance. But if you find that hockey stick, that little bit where it up curves, that'll be the best performance for the best price.
Yeah, and look, that is actually a really, really big issue, I guess, for the industry at the moment, for the construction industry. A whole lot of discussion around affordable housing. And then along with affordable is quality. And so how are we going to match up those two competing demands? That typically in the past, we've said that quality means higher price. Higher price means it's going to be less affordable. So is our only option then to construct poor housing for people who have a limited budget and allow only those with larger budgets to enjoy the benefits of well-designed and well-built houses? And there's an enormous amount of discussion, which is great around that. And I guess we're seeing people try to meet those challenges in a number of different ways. And one of those ways is if we build better houses but slightly smaller, we will get a better outcome. The other is a whole thing around just encouraging the practitioners, people like myself as a licensed builder, to know more about what we're building and build better through better techniques. And then there's obviously issues around the building code and what our actual minimum standards are.
I don't know why I jotted this down this morning, because there's no reason that you've had any involvement with it, but I did write down construction controversies, and you were just talking then about building standards and building qualities and stuff. And I just thought, I literally don't know why I thought about this. Maybe because I drove past a big building yesterday, one of the big white tents over it, to do with, of course, the leaky house situation in the 1990s, where obviously there was some massive balls ups made by government regulations or by local body regulations saying you could do this Mediterranean style house that didn't have an eave and yada yada yada. And now we're hitting that. Are there any, when that happened, did you see that coming? Like, were you one of these builders that was like, this is not going to be a good way to build a house? And is there things that still come up now that you kind of think this is not best practice? Like, are you someone who warns away from trends and stuff because it may not be best practice? Maybe this is coming back to my over-engineering idea. Like, if a client was to present you with an idea, and even though it's completely legit when it came to the regs, are you the kind of guy that goes, best practice, we really want to have X, Y, Z, even if it looks good, it's not going to function well? How do you address those controversies in building?
Yeah, look, I suppose actually when you first started mentioning that, the first thought I had was, I am incredibly grateful for the skill and the dedication and the knowledge of the people that I first worked with. So, in a sense, I never really did a formal apprenticeship. I do have my New Zealand Certificate of Trade, trade certificate in carpentry, and certainly I've done enough hours to qualify in order to do that. So, without doing a formal apprenticeship, I have done an apprenticeship sort of thing. And have always been incredibly grateful for Tom, who was my first boss, because he brought with him, and he's a Dutchman like my family is, he brought with him a tremendous sense of pride about what he did, and he also brought with him a tremendous amount of knowledge. He was, and is, thankfully still around, a very intelligent, dedicated, insightful builder, right? I'm like I say, I'm always grateful to him, because at lunchtime we would sit around and talk about, you'd look at a truss and he'd go, okay, there's two forces working on a truss, compression and tension. When you understand what they are, you'll understand how a truss works. Right. And so I think sometimes with our training, we're just teaching people to do something, put a truss up. We're not always teaching them how does the truss work. Right. And I had this experience of, so we're talking about that experience, those conversations at lunchtime in the late 1980s. And then you fast forward to sort of 5 years ago, and there's a young carpenter who's getting close to finishing his apprenticeship. He's working on site with me. He's doing air foam, air seal around the window. So today, cladding on, building wrap, cavity batten, blah, blah, window goes in, and then on the inside, you put perf rod and an air seal. And he was doing that, and I said, why are you doing that? And his response was, boss told me to. And I said, yeah, okay, so he's told you to, but why are you doing it? What is it achieving? What's the science behind it? What's the research? And to be honest, he was a little perplexed. He just knew that he had to do it. He didn't understand that it was helping to control moisture, that it works on barometric pressure, variance between high pressure and low pressure, how moisture migrates through a building envelope. The notion that moisture migrates through a wall will come as a hell of a surprise to most people. It's like, it's a wall. How does moisture get through there? Well, it does. And there's tremendous amounts of building science. So, I guess I'm not saying that all apprentices are like that. And actually, he's a bloody good builder. But it does, for me, say that we need to treat building as a science and treat and teach the theory, not just the practice as well.
I'm fascinated because, and I've got the most random question in the world coming for you next.
Sure.
I'm interested that you said not all apprentices are like that. I would put the blame, the whatever, for that actually on the boss, because it should be the boss's job to teach that. And I guess the apprentice could ask, why are we doing this? But if the boss is not teaching that to that apprentice, that would be more of a boss issue, in my unqualified opinion, than an apprentice issue.
Yeah, although bearing in mind, today most apprenticeships are run through various construction trade training organisations, and I have quite a bit to do with BCITO, and the apprentices that I have had a couple of years ago, I've needed to spend the time to ensure that they're up to speed with their learning. So yes, the apprentice should ideally be having those conversations with. See, this is where I quite like the old fashioned and the tradition around building as well. So back in the day, you would probably have an apprentice who would then become a carpenter, who might then become a journeyman, who might then be engaged by a master. And these are sort of ancient ways of looking at the trades, and you'll find it whether you were a goldsmith or a blacksmith or a mason or a carpenter or anything like that, there would be these formal traditional processes to go through. And I guess in a sense we've kind of lost track of that. But I like that notion, and I keep it in the back of my mind when I'm thinking about someone moving through their career in the trades, going, you start as an apprentice, you then become qualified, but then your learning should continue, and the lovely term journeyman indicates that you are on a journey, and that journey doesn't end. You keep learning, keep developing, keep upskilling. So I think there's a real story to tell around not just kind of, I suppose with all of us, we want to keep developing professionally. And so we need to start telling a story in the construction sector about what are your pathways and avenues to continue to develop and learn.
I would think as well, correct me if I'm wrong, but the knowledge behind the science, or the knowledge of why you put that in that place, would be getting less and less also, because you've already said today, you don't often frame up yourself. You get prefabricated stuff from off-site. So if the wall comes pre-made, pre-measured from a factory in South Auckland, to your site in East Auckland or whatever it is, then you literally don't even need to know what's inside, because it's there. What your skill is actually, please builders, I'm not being disrespectful, but it's almost like it's become Lego, whereas before it was construction, if you were to go down to the nth degree.
Yeah, and look, I think that's is it a criticism? I think it's just an insight as to what the industry is going to look like. So again, when I started building, we would frame up ourselves, and you get a great big packet of timber and you cut all your nogs, mark out all your studs. And I guess the beauty of that was that you were thinking about the whole building right at the beginning, because when you're building that wall for the bathroom, you're also thinking about where does the bath go, where does the shower go, where do I need to put nogs in, etc. And so you've got a much for me anyway, I felt that I had a much better insight into the whole building if I was building it from scratch. And then, that's impractical these days. So yeah, typically you'll get pre-cut, pre-nail frames delivered, and you're just standing them up going A meets B, B meets C, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, frame it up, and so on. And I guess we are moving to, and I'm actually a fan of this, increasingly off-site manufacture. I think that it is going to be a significant key to unlocking solutions around housing affordability. And there is some real quality benefits to be gained by that. There's a tremendous amount of efficiency. There's a lot less waste potentially. There's a lot of benefits to off-site manufacture. But you're right. The person that is then assembling the components on site may not have the depth or breadth of knowledge as someone who would have nailed those frames together.
Interesting. And now here's the randomest question in the world. The guy that you did an apprenticeship under,
Tom, yep.
Did he live in Howick?
Yeah, Tom Bucher. Yeah, might have done back in the day.
We may have met well before because I went to Sacred Heart College with one of his sons. We were best mates and one of the best mates groups. And I spent a lot of time in that house overlooking the golf course. And I mean, you said Tom, you said Dutch, you went builder, and I wonder if we can throw in the Catholic thing there as well. And I went,
absolutely. Yep.
I know. Who you're talking about.
That was not that anyone else will be aware of this, but when you came down the driveway, there was a house on the left and a house on the right. So I'm not sure which one you were in. Tom built both of them for the family over time. And the one on the left-hand side was where my first day working as a builder was a Saturday morning. And I knew the family through actually youth work, which I'd done before I even started building and broadcasting. And I got into building in a sense by knowing the family, and then I might have been Joe, one of his sons, said, "Oh, look, Dad's about to start building a house and needs a hand." And so my first day on site, I rocked up on my motorbike, and Tom went, "Oh, it's Saturday morning. We were going to pour concrete slab for the driveway, for the garage." And when I arrived, this great big pile of builder's mix and bags and bags of cement and an old concrete mixer. And I went, "I thought we were pouring the slab." And he went, "Yeah, look, couldn't get any concrete today, so I got some builder's mix, start mixing." And that was my first day building, was to mix 6 cubic meters of concrete for the driveway by hand.
That is so funny. Like, I never went into the house on the left. This is going to be interesting to nobody else on the podcast, so you can skip forward a minute or two. The house on the left from memory was a white wooden house. The house on the right had the big decks over that golf course. I spent time in the house on the right, so it would have been 88, 89, 90. Me and one of his sons, I don't mention his name because that's up to them, but we're at Sacred Heart together and spent a lot of time in that house.
Yeah.
How funny is that?
Wow. That's classic New Zealand though, eh?
Yeah, 2 degrees. And I think from memory, the son that I spent time with at school is now a police officer in Nelson.
Oh, yes, I know exactly who you mean. Yeah, yes. Yep.
How crazy is that? I trust that bloody maniac with a gun. God, spent a lot of time on the basketball court with him. I wouldn't give him a gun. He's for all
awesome
in China.
Yeah, look, I guess in life there's always those fortuitous moments. We don't necessarily plan for this sort of thing, and suddenly this arrives. And I'm incredibly grateful for my parents making the decision to immigrate to New Zealand back in 1961. And then other things happen in your life, and certainly one of the things that I really treasure in my life is the fact that I was introduced to that family, that I got to work with Tom for a period of time, and I feel I owe him a great debt because he was such a good teacher. And when I'm, I suppose, spending time with, I can say it now, young people today, given that I'm in my mid-50s, I'm conscious about listening and encouraging and trying to maybe imbue in them some of those things that he did for me. And I guess for all of us at a certain age, if we have that opportunity to influence the lives of young people, particularly young tradespeople starting out, then I think we need to be part of that.
Amazing. I wanted to ask you about, it kind of comes back to the question we jumped away from a bit before about the fast, cheap, good and the quality of housing. I was involved with a reality TV show, gosh, who knows, 1990s. It was one of those, we'll come and surprise renovate your garden, you know, and with this and that and the other. And my sister, her then partner, they had a big house overlooking Muriwai Beach, and she nominated him as a recipient of this competition, and he got selected because it was the most spectacular view in the world. It would have been great for television. And so we all turned up on a Saturday or whatever it was and spent a whole day completely redoing the garden. Like, we were all volunteers. Like, so that you bring all your family along and they do all the work. And, you know, I lugged around tons of those big blooming retaining bricks to build a wall and all that kind of stuff. And at the end of it, it looked amazing. But I understand that the Saturday after it was shot, he took all the bark off the garden, took all the plants out, and laid weed mat. Because when this television crew did the garden, they actually didn't do it properly. And it was still obviously looked amazing and that, but it actually had to then get corrected. How do you address that with the block? And I know that you, as the foreman, I'm not casting aspersions here. I'm just wondering how it all goes, because it's specifically, actually, the clip we played earlier is the clip that I'm interested in. Obviously, they're only laying wallpaper. That doesn't feel like an RMA issue. But if there are time frames, that means sometimes things won't get finished. To make sure it's all to code and stuff, how does the block address that?
Yeah, look, and you know, I remember years ago someone saying to me, "Oh, look, you know, you're just building these houses for show, and they just get bulldozed later on," sort of thing. As it happens, the first block houses had been bulldozed, and there's an apartment block there, but that's more of Auckland than anything. No, look, a big part of my job is around compliance and regulation and code compliance, right? So, you know, all of the buildings have building consents. They all must be built in accordance to the conditions of the building consent. There are regular building inspections. I conduct sort of my own regular inspections, like 2-3 times a day. I'll be going through the houses. And the other thing is that all of the teams must engage their own licensed building practitioner. And the beauty of that system is that anyone who is an LBP, they are asked to and must provide a record of work for the work that they do. This is for all jobs, all restricted building work. And then that is recorded and captured on the CCC and is available to anyone who wants to investigate. And all of us as LBPs are responsible for our work for 10 years. So, you know, we're not seeing shortcuts because people know that if what they did was somehow insufficient or failed or whatever, they would be getting a call and they would be held responsible. So, and you know, at the end of the series, the final inspection process takes place. So a council inspector will come out, they'll go through it, and inevitably there'll be a couple of things that we need to do. And to be honest, I don't know a single builder who's ever passed their first final inspection. There's always something. We'll address those. And just recently, actually, we ran all of this year's block houses through for the final inspection that was issued. That allows me then to go and prepare the documentation for a CCC application, which has been done. That goes in. Inevitably, you get questions back from the processing team at council. RFIs, I've addressed all of those concerns, and the CCCs have been issued. So these houses, like all of the other block houses, are fully code compliant. And that's a not small job, and it is my job.
Do you ever have a situation where kind of competition comes up against certification? And obviously you're saying it does get sorted out, but I'm wondering, if I'm thinking about a competition now, if I'm going head to head with Team B and they don't get the plumbing done on the toilet correctly by, as you say, 6:30 tools down, which that obviously has to get rectified. But as the competition goes, is that getting rectified by you and your team afterwards? In other words, it's kind of helping the team, or do they have to come back and kind of finish it off at the end of the series?
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, there'll be a delay to their build in a week, and they simply won't finish the week, right? There are some things that you can't go back and fix. You have to get it right straight away.
Yep.
So, and I'm quite happy to tell people you just can't carry on until you fix that. And you would have seen on the show this year that look, like any project, there's always little things that you need time to go back and fix up. And so this year on the series and the previous ones, we've given the teams, part of a week to go through and do some remediation. Some of it might be cosmetic, but for some, it's an opportunity to go through and just tidy up those little bits and pieces, door hardware that might not have got fitted, and all of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
The snag list at an end of a job can seem never ending.
Do we know now, I mean, speaking more specifically about the block, as I'll bring up the page again, do we have any idea yet? Because obviously it says up on the thing here, coming soon, because obviously one of the big payoffs, much like any television program, is the final episode, which is the finale. The houses are built, the houses are finished. I guess the people are going through, but you've got some people here who have given up, I guess, hundreds of hours of their time, who are now looking, hey, I want the payoff. I want to win this competition and take my $100,000 out of it. But then you've also assumed the producers wanting some of their money out as well. And you've obviously made a decision not to do like a virtual auction. You're waiting for the actual live auction. It says live auction final. Is there any conversation? And I know that's a silly question because it's COVID, but what are the conversations at the moment around when and how that's going to work?
Yeah, the conversations very much are COVID, level two. So, it's, I know, like all other real estate agents in Auckland, at level 3, you are allowed to at least resume doing viewings, which we've done again. And I think until we move to level 2, we won't see an announcement around the date of the auction. We had a date, it's been shifted. And look, this is, all of us, I think, have got so used to ringing around going, oh, that date's not going to work. I was on the phone this morning, we were going to do a sort of charity thing in a week or so. That's not going to happen. We're all in this boat pretty much, or all in the same storm. I realise that people are pushing back against that notion that we're all in the same boat, but COVID has impacted on all of us, and I guess the impact for the block is to delay the auction. There still will be one. It'll be interesting to see what it looks like. That's not a discussion that I'm generally involved with, but certainly, I'm keen to see the houses go to the new owners.
Hopefully before Christmas. That felt like a bit of a subtle stab there at the Brian Tamaki rally. Some people are pushing back against it. Do you personally have, if you're allowed to say, do you personally have, like, I'm looking at two of the houses look very similar from the outside.
Sure.
That's the Tim and Arthur and the Dylan and Keegan. Then you've got Connie and Rach, Meg and Dan. Personally, do you have a favorite one that you like the look of, like the style?
Yeah, and I think I've been, I probably shouldn't have favourites, but most of us do. Right from, obviously I'm involved in sort of pre-commencement meetings. So a meeting with the architects before, a sod was turned on site, having a look at the drawings. And I looked at the drawings for, in particular, house 3 and 4, and thought, you know what, if I was building, particularly on a site that was constrained, the 3 and 4 are relatively long and narrow sites, not terribly narrow, but I think what we've done really well this year is provided a really workable solution that is, in a sense, a template for lots and lots of development. So, as people would be aware, prior to those 4 houses going on site, these are 2 adjoining sites with 2 existing bungalows on them. So by subdividing and re-subdividing the sections, we've created 4 sections and space for 4 houses. They're good size houses. The beauty of designing 4 together is that the architect was able to orientate them in such a way that I think one of the biggest concerns about sort of inner city redevelopment is a lack of privacy. So how do you build for privacy? And one of the ways to do that is that if the buildings are designed to complement each other, you can ensure that, for example, the courtyard of one house doesn't immediately abut the courtyard of another one, or if there's a two-story section of it, that there's not large windows that look into your neighbours. And this series of the block, with these designs, I think that particular problem has been well resolved by the architecture and by the architects, and all credit to them. So I looked at House 3 and 4, long-winded way of saying I really like House 3 and 4. I like that design. I think that there's something really cool about, and again, without sounding too architectural about these things, one of the things that the architects were talking about is that they wanted to sort of capture a little bit of the sense of what inner city living in the early part of last century would have looked like. And if you've lived in, I guess, one of the heritage suburbs in Dunedin,
Mighty Hill and all that kind of area.
Ponsonby, Greyland, Kandala, that sort of thing. What you'll often see is original structure, lean-to, and then sort of an outhouse. And if you look at House 3 and 4, they are essentially like that. You've got a tall two-story section, a lean-to, which is the kitchen area, and then you've got I'd call it an outhouse, and I like outhouses, so it's not derogatory. Living space at the back, which has its own pavilion roof. It's light and airy. So there's lots of things about the architecture of those buildings that I really like. And to be honest, if I had the right site, I would shamelessly steal their ideas.
And look, let me say as well, for people who are watching and realizing there was a bit of a camera outage there, well done on the padding while I sorted that out. That was perfect. So I can see you were broadcasting. People who are listening won't know what I'm talking about, but for some reason my camera decided to turn off, and there was a big black square here. So you're a professional, sir. You're a professional, sir.
Absolutely.
I'm going to do a shameless plug here, but it's really based around something you've talked about, because you talked about, you used the word affordable and used the word quality when you were talking about housing, which is ironic. Yes. Because last night I relaunched a product called Elephant TV, which is a debate series, and we did a debate with a property investor and Julianne Genter, the Green Party MP. And the moot of the debate was affordable quality housing is a right. And the reason I've got this page up for people watching is it's taken directly from the Green Party manifesto. I probably shouldn't say that, because I'll say communist. Their Green Party, plans for and policy ideas, that affordable quality housing is a right. The shameless plug goes like this. If you want to go check it out, look up Elephant TV. That's the logo for it there. Elephant TV on Facebook, and you can see that Julianne Genter joined us. Darcy Ungaro was the property investor and registered financial advisor, and this big ugly hairy SOB was moderating the whole thing. And we talked for an hour and 40 minutes in the end.
Wow.
On the statement, affordable quality housing is a right. It was live streamed, and we had interaction from the people who were watching at the time. You brought up affordable quality, and I want to ask you the same question, which I kind of wrapped up that conversation with the debate with last night, and that was directed to Julianne, the MP who was a part of, I guess, the writing of these policy ideas or policies or aspirations, whatever you want to use. Is there are three words in there that are relative. The three relative words are affordable, quality, and housing. They can mean different things to different people. I mean, we don't need to get into the rights or the right of it, because my question was, so therefore, if you have a right, that implies to me that I can have my rights impinged upon. And if my rights are impinged upon, that can have a punitive response to the person impinging on it. So if you give someone this as a right, then what happens, for example, if my house is affordable but not quality? What happens if my house is quality but not affordable? What is my house? Is it my garage out the back of the property? Is it my caravan? So when I say they're relative, they can all mean different things. But I guess I just wanted to kind of bounce off you this idea of affordable quality housing. You used those terms earlier, which is why I've jumped back to it. Being a right. I mean, when I talked to some contributors about this who I was talking to, I was saying, I wonder if more the idea of affordable quality housing as an ideal would be a better way to say it rather than a right. But then again, we talk about basic human rights being, food, water, shelter. So it's a really interesting dynamic and a place we're in right now. And I guess from someone who, I guess, Pete, some people might look at you and go, you're contributing to the housing thing because you're making these houses that sell for $1.8 million, and who can afford that? but you're also someone who's in the nub of it, on a daily, and as a broadcaster, figuring out a way to speak to people about this as well.
Sure.
So I'd like to get your take on that, the rights of having affordable quality housing, the ideals. I'll stop talking now, and I'll tell you what Julianne said afterwards. But what are your thoughts around that?
Gosh, I mean, look, it's a massive thing, and people often say that and then don't give an answer. But I'll try and be succinct. Look, I through my background and faith and all those sorts of things, I do have an interest in, I guess, social justice, and I think housing is actually a big part of social justice. And I think we have a better society when we are able to house people well. Now, what that looks like and how that's achieved is enormously broad. And some of the groups that I've had some involvement with, like Auckland Community Housing a little bit and others, they talk about a housing continuum, a spectrum of housing, and that will extend through to sort of public housing provided for people through to private housing. And then the spectrum for private housing is going to be incredibly vast as well. I mean, there's, I live in Auckland, there's stories every week about a house selling for 10 million, 12 million, $15 million. Now, these are obviously a very small part of the housing market. And then, a young guy that I was working with on Wednesday, actually, I've known him for a while. We were caught up, we were on a site together, and he was talking about the fact that he and his partner had just managed to buy a house. Now, interestingly enough, for a young guy and a builder, he bought a brand new house. So there's just so much complexity. And again, a little bit like the complexity around building, I think that we need to sharpen the tools that we use to dissect housing, right? It's a lot of the discussion is too surface and too blunt. So yes, I think that we are, to go back to the beginning, I think that we're a much better society when we have better housing. And then that is incredibly broad as well. And there are elements within that. So security of tenure, security of housing. So, if you're in a rental property and you're always worried that the landlord's going to sell it because, in fact, he's not really a landlord, he's a property developer or speculator, then that's not great, because you put your kids into the local school and then the rents go up, or the house market changes and suddenly you're moving to a different suburb. And so you've got that dislocation. Or if you're in poor quality housing, and again, I do a bit of work with people like the Green Building Council. Now, the great thing with what they're doing, and others in that field, is actually doing some assessments, like measuring the quality of the housing. And if you go across New Zealand and you look at the quality, the average quality of New Zealand housing, it is poor. It's below average at best, and average isn't a particularly high bar. I would say, and others would say, that the New Zealand Building Code, as it is at the moment, isn't aspirational. You won't get a good house if you build to the code, and that's up for grabs. So, and then, issues around housing affordability. Is it just, is it right that people, particularly on limited income, potentially are having to spend 50, 60% of their income to provide housing? And then if that housing then is of poor quality, that's tough, and arguably unjust. There's also a slightly older, curmudgeonly part of me that goes, it was never easy, never will be easy to own your own home. And, we need to be telling people that as well, that it's not easy. And, recent changes to things like tax deductibility around interest on loans for investment properties. Be interesting to see what that does. I note, and we happen to be landlords, that something that hasn't been talked about at all, seemingly, is that if you, as a landlord, let your property back through a community housing provider or through the state, you can continue to claim the interest deductibility on your loan.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. Didn't see that in the legislation. So that's really interesting. And you can say that that's a bribe. You can say that that's coercion or it's an encouragement for people to let their properties back to the state or to state providers. Look, I find it an absolutely fascinating area. But I think where I would start with is, I don't know what, like my experience was, my parents bought the house that I grew up in, just before I was born. Mum tells a story about painting the nursery while I was still in her womb. And I think any of us who are builders, our son was born and I came home, ripped out the kitchen. We're always doing this stuff. But I grew up in that house. I had my whole childhood there, and I stayed in that house until I left home at 18. And there's a tremendous security around that. I'm not saying that people should stay in their houses for ages and ages and ages, or that shifting is not a bad thing, but the security of tenure is, and that's a really important issue.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you would talk about your experience. My experience was very similar. That I came home to the house I lived in as a child, and actually moved with my parents. I had my 21st birthday party in that home because I was a student in Auckland and stayed home for a couple of extra years. Yeah. And then I had my 21st birthday in that house. Between 21 and 22, my mum and dad moved to a new place because they were empty nesters basically with only me at home. And that's when I also moved, so left home. So I get it. The house I'm in at the moment is a very strange house. I call it my West Auckland monolith. It's sort of a masonry block building. It's not particularly attractive. Well, it's not attractive at all, but it's incredibly functional. And I've sort of made the decision that I'll be here for a 10-year period. And that's when my kids have finished their schooling. And I'm kind of going, I can already, in my head, I'm already planning the next stage. But I've never actively thought that the security of being in the same space will be good for the kids. But as you say that, I think, I'm just I thought I'd do it for ease. It's like, it's a good house. It's a good house for the kids. There's lots of space. It's good for their friends, their annoying friends to come around. It's close to their school. It's close to, bus routes and stuff. But actually, it also would provide them some security in their lives, which is they've had turmoil. They've had, parents break up, and they've had, some of those issues. So as much security as you can provide is a good thing. I was going to say, I think personally, the solution to the housing crisis at the moment is sort of rent for life securities. I don't think that there's a solution in the building of houses, because I still think, how the hell are they going to build 10,000 houses when it already takes weeks, if not months, if not years, to book a builder to build a house by itself? And I think, so where are all these people coming from to build 10,000 houses? And I know there can be solutions like, prefabricated and that sort of thing as well. But actually, they could solve it a lot more now by changing the laws around giving renters security. Places like the Netherlands, places like Germany, places like France that have these things in place, the renters then get to basically have, and I'm talking metaphorical, but have ownership of the property that they can live in for the next 20 years. They're not going to get a call from the Auckland landlord. My son's coming to university in Otago next year. Here's your 90 days notice. I want him in to have that place. That's not going to happen. So I think there's actually an immediate solution they could do, which is to address, and they are addressing, they're making better for renters, things like the quality of housing, but address things like that today. And that would make a huge difference for a lot of people. It might not change the prices of houses. It might not change that. But what it would do is, for the people who aren't in houses, give them a lot of that security that you're talking about and that I'm talking about, to be able to be in a place for a long time for security.
Yeah, and I think, we're starting to see that, and even the term build to rent has become sort of common in the vernacular around building at the moment. And I would argue that 5 years ago, you'd hardly ever hear that phrase. They were there, but very few. So you are starting to see some developers, which is a good thing, not a bad thing, actually going, we're going to build, there's a very well-known one in Sandringham. I think it's 12 or 15 apartments of varying sizes in a complex. It has a shared space. It has a shared laundry. The purpose of the build is to provide rental accommodation for people. And there are going to be people that want to sign a 5, 10, 15-year lease on a property. And if you're a landlord, what's the downside to that? I think it's a great thing. So we are starting to see that. You mentioned the offsite manufacturer and so on. There was an article that I caught up with this week even. Kind of Order, as sort of the new version of Housing New Zealand, had just signed an agreement with a prefab manufacturer, I think out of Hamilton, to provide, it might have been like 60 offsite manufactured dwellings. And the part that caught my attention is that they were going to have those finished in 3 months. Now, tell me who out, or, it might have been a slightly longer period than that. But, I'm thinking, gosh, 50 odd houses complete and ready to move into in that time frame indicates to me that we're starting to see the beginning of that wave of offsite manufacture potentially making a real difference to affordability and availability.
Yeah. Just to jump back into the part of this conversation, affordable quality housing, right, to tell you what, what I got from talking to Julianne Gentle last night about it, and as I said, people can look up Elephant TV on Facebook and go watch it for themselves, is I think what the Greens are saying, and you've used the word, the building code is not aspirational, that this is their aspirational target. Because I suggested that if this was going to become legislation, you might have to narrow down the focus so it could be legislated on. But I think what the Greens are doing is looking at, an aspirational way to move forward, and that's what it is. Possibly, I think that Julianne, not to you use serious terms and people jump up and down saying there's no comparison, but she basically said 100 years before slavery was cancelled, was outlawed, people had aspirational goals to outlaw it. There were people fighting for the abolition of slavery 100 years before it happened. And they had aspirational goals, which people would have thought were ridiculous at the times. I think that's probably what the Greens are going for, these aspirational goals to aim towards, to make things better. And maybe one day they will get there, maybe. So that's the vibe I got from her about that.
Yeah, I mean, you got to dream big, right? And if you're in that particular big, that's your dream, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think where I've found it a little bit sort of grating is this notion that somehow property investors, landlords are, greedy, self-centered, only in it for profit, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that that's a misleading narrative. And I think it's borne out a little bit by the statistics. So if you look at all of the investment/rental properties that are owned in New Zealand, of that number, 78%, I believe is the figure, are owned by people that only own one investment property. So I think there was a lot of banging of the drums that somehow there's this group of property developers, speculators, investors out there owning numerous rental properties and somehow stifling the market and making it unaffordable. And I think that, the statistics would tell you that that's not the case. I think that for better or worse, New Zealanders have come to see housing as a solid investment.
And if you're watching this, I was trying to line something else up again. What I was going to say is, it was a good thing to watch this yesterday, and for people who want to check it out, you can. Because Darcy, the property investor, is someone who owns. He may have either 3 rentals or own 3 overall. So he's in that camp of people that you're talking about that maybe some people don't like. And obviously, Julianne being Green Party MP, you would think that they're quite a long way apart ideologically speaking. But actually, there was a surprising amount that they actually agreed on. And I think what they both were saying on some level, from their perspective, probably that you'd say either on, I don't think we have a far right in New Zealand politically, but further on the right, more conservative maybe, and further on the left, more progressive maybe, is that they were both saying those guys running the place in the middle, they're not doing a good enough job. So even these people who were at sort of either end of the perspective kind of agreed on a lot of things. Now, they might have had a different solution to it or a different outcome from it, but it was interesting to see how much agreement there was in that conversation we had last night about what wasn't working. it's your classic right versus left. The right thinks give the money to the top and it'll trickle down. The left thinks give the money to the bottom to support them, and they'll buy things from the people at the top. So that's a classic thing, and that was sort of what we ended up getting to, I think, in a lot of situations. But it was really interesting to see how much they were in agreement with what wasn't working. So it's worth a watch for people who are interested.
And again, I'm always the optimist, and I think there's some interesting stuff around social policy in terms of understanding who are the best people to deliver these outcomes. And, I don't think it's unfair to say that the state possibly isn't always the best people to deliver these outcomes. Bill English talked a lot about social capital. Part of their model was, well, actually, if we go to people who are professional in this space, right, people like Habitat for Humanity, DePaul House, Vision West, and so on, community housing providers, and give them the resources to provide the houses, and they often do all of the wraparound services, we will get a better outcome. That they are way more nimble, way more involved, way more in touch with their local communities. And I noticed there's a place not far from me, which is a brand new kind of order development. It's about 12 apartments of varying sizes, and that's going to be administered by DePaul House, who are a housing provider. They're going to have an on-site manager there, and they will administer that building on behalf of Kind of Order. Now, I think that's a really good model and will probably have better outcomes for transitional social housing than the typical model, which is, here's a house, see you later, which is disastrous or has been disastrous. So, like I say, I'm always optimistic, and I think little green shoots like that are to be encouraged.
Now, the most important question of the day is, when we do see the block live auction,
sure,
how long is the beard going to be? Because it's a good look. It's a good look, and I'll bring up your ZB page here, where you look like a clean shaven sort of a thing.
It's a very old photo, folks. Scary thing is, it's probably actually not that old, that photo. I like the look. I like the beard. I like it. I want to see it stay, obviously. But people want to hear from you on Sunday morning nationwide on Newstalk ZB, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. The resident builder, and obviously, keep an eye on TV3. I'm sure once the live auctions come up, it'll be heavily. Do you think? And you don't know this, I'm sure. Will there be a point where they'll have to cut their losses and go, we're going to just have to do it as an online auction? Like if we were still talking about this in December, is there going to be a point where they're going to have to try and figure out a different way to auction these houses? I guess if I was in their shoes, I would probably start to consider that. If it was my money on the line, then potentially you'd look at that. I think we do want to have engagement, both from the public and the teams. And, one of the great things about the auctions in the past was it was a chance for the teams to come back together, often sort of 5, 6, 7 weeks after they'd finished. They'd had a chance to rest and recuperate. They were allowed to bring a couple of their tradies with them. So it's a great opportunity for all of us tradies to get together. And I really enjoyed that. But that's got nothing to do with selling the houses. That's just us getting together and having good old knees up. In the end, I guess selling the houses is going to be important, and there'll be a creative way to do that.
Hey, Pete, people don't know this, and as if I was a professional, I probably wouldn't mention it, but 2 weeks ago we did this, and I completely asked something up, and it didn't work.
I think it was me.
No, it was absolutely me, because I know what it is now. And 2 weeks later, you're gracious enough to come back and have a chat, and it feels like a brand new conversation. It feels like we could do this again.
And we learned some things that we wouldn't have learned if we had just stuck with the previous one. So the fact that you've been in a house that I helped build it's a real treasure.
And then when you eventually start building outside of Auckland, you can come and build my house down in Dunedin, and then I'll be in another house.
I tell you what, I was, please forgive me, but I've only been to Dunedin once, and it wasn't that long ago. And I had a moment where I could go for a bit of a drive, and I drove out along that road to Port Chalmers, and I was looking at the little boat houses next to the water there, and I thought, no, that's a piece of me. I would be as happy as Larry in something like that. It's a gorgeous city.
I've always wanted, for people who don't know, there are old school boat houses. So you go around both sides of the harbour. There are old school boat houses that drop off into the that you have to walk across a plank to get to. Then they're in the water. Yep. I've always thought that would be an amazing. I can probably bring one up. I always thought that would be an amazing place to have a studio. If I go boat houses, Dunedin, I'll probably bring one up to show people if they want to know. And go images, this sort of thing. Oh, these are probably, it's probably a Dunedin one. There you go. Out over the water. I
got some photos myself. I just seriously, I would be.
Yeah, that's Portobello.
Beautiful.
So talking about. Yeah. Now, technically, you're not supposed to live in them, but I'm like, studio in one of those, that'd be pretty dope.
That'd be awesome. Didn't Stan Hutt used to live in one on the harbour at Parramatta?
I don't know, but I'm pretty sure in Dunedin you're not supposed to live in them. They're not supposed to have permanent things in them, but I'm sure people have composting toilets in them and tanks and all that kind of stuff.
Fabulous.
Hey, Pete, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming back and joining us again.
Thank you very much for your time. Really enjoyed it. And I'll tune in Elephant TV for that debate. Sounds great.
Yeah, and I think it was the only disappointing side for me, because obviously I'm always looking for conflict, Peter. That's not true. Is that it was they were in agreement on a lot, and it was an enjoyable experience. It certainly was not blood on the floor, and it didn't turn into a dumpster fire, which is what I was aiming for. So thank you, and
pleasure.
We'll talk sometime soon, and good luck with the finishing of the block.